Support comes from Thomas Nelson Community College, now becoming Virginia Peninsula Community College, the first choice to start a career. Gain skills in fields like cybersecurity and education. More at tncc.edu.
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, partnering with donors from all walks of life to improve southeastern Virginia through grants, scholarships, and leadership initiatives. Learn more at hamptonroadscf.org.
Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. So here are the facts. African American and Latinx students are more likely to receive lower grades, score lower on standardized tests, drop out of high school, and less likely to enter and complete college than whites. The question is, why? Is it socioeconomics, poor funding of minority-majority schools, lack of preschool education, institutional racism, discipline methods? Up next on Another View, the first in a series of shows on closing the education gap between non-white and white students, looking beneath the surface on public education, right after this national, regional, and local news from NPR and WHRO News.
Discussing today's topics from an African American perspective, this is Another View.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Happy New Year, AV listeners. We wish you good health, wealth, peace, and joy in 2022. Now, back in 2020, when the coronavirus pandemic upended all of our lives, the width and depth of the educational divide between white kids and children of color became yet again painfully clear as public school divisions scrambled to pivot to remote learning. It became impossible to learn for students who had no access to computers and the internet, and Black children were disproportionately affected. Sadly, the gap is more like a chasm, and something must be done if all children are to get the education they need. Recently, WHRO Media received a grant from Virginia Humanities, which allows us to explore the issues surrounding equitable education for Black students. This is the first of 2 Another View programs on the subject, and we will also have a virtual town hall on February the 10th, where we can hear from you, the community. Joining me today to talk about the most pressing issues are Dr. James Fedderman, President, the Virginia Education Association. How are you, Dr. Fedderman?
I am well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for joining us today. And Jimmeka Anderson is a Ph.D. candidate who specializes in urban education. How are you, Jimmeka?
I'm doing great.
Good. Happy New Year to you. And former Juvenile and Domestic Relations judge for the city of Chesapeake, Judge Eileen Olds. And Judge Olds is also a board member of WHRO Public Media. How are you, Judge Olds?
I'm fine. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you also. Now, in full disclosure, I served as a member of the Beneath the Surface Advisory Committee and on the subcommittee which determined grant allocations. However, I recused myself from any consideration of WHRO Public Media's submission, and I will receive no financial compensation from the grant. So we just want to make sure that we are being transparent. So during my research for today's show, panelists, I found a laundry list of causes of the academic achievement gap between Black and white students. So they listed things like school funding, preschool education, or lack thereof, socioeconomic status, cultural competence of teachers, discipline methods, parental involvement. But at the end of the day, everything seemed to come back to either race or poverty. And so my question to you is, what is it? Is it racism that causes this gap, or is it being poor that causes the gap, or is it both? Let me start with you, Dr. Fedderman.
Well, first of all, Happy New Year to everyone, and thank you so much for having me.
Sure.
It's a privilege to be here to share my perspective.
Thank you.
And one of the things that I'd like to put in the conversation first and foremost is that COVID has only exacerbated issues that have existed in our schools for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
we have always had disparities in learning with regards to children of color. And, you hear people toss around this term called learning loss. Well, children of color have experienced learning loss for as long as I can remember, and it's called summer break. Many of those kids have not been able to keep up with the services that they've received during school during the regular time. And many of the parents really struggle with understanding today's learning. It's very different even from when I was in school. But one of the greater things that I'd like to share is our children are like credit cards. We can pay now or we can pay later. And when educators talk about things that they need in their classroom, that should be an expectation and not an option. Educators struggle to get basic supplies to provide a meaningful learning opportunity for their children that they are entrusted to teach in the environments they are expected to work. And I think that the community truly plays a huge factor in which our children are able to learn, to grow, and to thrive. And I believe in my heart, parents send the very best that they have to school to be educated, to be the best possible adult that they can be. But there are deficits that are experienced, but educators are in such a box that everybody's expected to teach the same thing at exactly the same time, and students are expected to learn it and retain it at exactly the same measures. And those elements are absolutely impossible.
Okay. You bring up a lot of points that we're going to talk about today, Dr. Fedderman, but I want to ask, Jimmeka, let me ask you then, as a baseline, do you think that the gap is because of racism or is it because of poverty, or is it both?
Honestly, it's because, in my opinion, it's because of both.
Okay.
And through a lot of the research that I have been engaging with and writing about during my career right now in this program with urban education, I think if you really think about it, a lot of this work has been going on historically, even from some of the research that Du Bois did and his case studies on looking at the income gap of people of color, particularly Black people in the early 20th century. A lot of those challenges are still prevalent today. A lot of the issues that we're discussing that's played out with police brutality, all of the linkage is connected to poverty that is experienced by historically marginalized communities, Black communities. And so there's been even a lot of work that has been done on the impact of the wealth gap with redlining, Richard Rothstein, the book he did on the color of law. And so we know that race and poverty is interconnected in the U.S. So that is reflected in the communities when we see high poverty schools where 90% of the kids are on free and reduced lunch. Those schools are predominantly hallways filled with Black, Hispanic kids. And so there's this linkage here that is hard to separate because it's been so intertwined historically in the fabrication of the U.S.
Okay. And Judge Olds, you see the kids when they are in trouble. But what, from your perspective, is it about race or is it about poverty?
Well, I have to agree with the other panelists. I think it's clearly both. And as you said, after having what I call a front row seat for 24 years as a sitting judge and now as a recall judge, there's no question that there's so many disparities, and it's because of those disparities that have minorities, I believe, before the court to a greater degree based on the fact that there's an educational deficit. We already know that those who are truant, and you'll hear me use that a lot, but, and I'll talk about the truancy program I started, but those who are truant and those who drop out of school are certainly more likely to end up in prison. There are an overwhelming majority of prison inmates who had, I'll say truancy again, or low performance in educational areas that, of course, are in the prison system. And then we also know that students who are I'll say not educationally inspired, are more likely to be involved in gangs and drugs and alcohol and violence and all those things that bring them before the court. And so that's certainly my interest. But I would say it's not just race, although race is a large part. But I think we do have to add poverty as another factor.
Speaking of what you work on, Judge Olds, so according to the United Negro College Fund, they did a report on the condition of colleges and career readiness. And one of the statistics that they quote is that Black students spend less time in the classroom due to discipline, which further hinders their access to a quality education. They are nearly 2 times as likely to be suspended without educational services as white students. They are 3.8 times as likely to receive 1 or more out-of-school suspensions. And in addition, they represent 19% of the nation's preschool population, yet 47% of those receiving more than 1 out-of-school suspension. And 2.3 times as likely to receive a referral to law enforcement or be subject to a school-related arrest as white students. So I know that you saw a lot of young people coming through your court, and you did start a truancy school. Tell us about what it was and why you felt it necessary to do that.
Well, exactly for the reasons we're having this discussion. I started the program, and this was over 10 or so years ago. Now it's more routine, but at the time it was almost unheard of. But I started it because I saw, again, firsthand that there was a glaring correlation between those who were truants and those who were engaging in criminal activity. And so while I would say not all truants, because there are a lot of reasons why people aren't able to attend school or fully engage in school that there's a laundry list of that. But so I would say not all truants were engaging in criminal behavior. But what I found was that those who were engaging in criminal behavior, by and large, were also truants. And so we were kind of at an impasse because the schools, it seemed, were of the mindset that, if these kids keep acting up and they end up in detention and they end up in court, well, then we don't have to worry about them. The courts will deal with them. But the courts, on the other hand, were saying, it's not our job to police who goes to school or who, gets suspended in school. And if it's that bad, they will end up in the court. So nobody was really doing anything about it. But I'm happy to say that the program that we started in Chesapeake had overwhelming success, primarily because we use early identifiers. And again, we can talk about what the law says, but at the point that you have 5 days of unexcused absence, technically, somebody should be doing something about it. But at that point, they were not. But we had the success because we had the intervention. We parents and students realized that it was against the law to skip school or not be engaged, and it made a tremendous impact. But that's the main reason I started it, because, and I'll just add, when we're about to sentence a juvenile, we have what we call a social history or a background report, I'll say. And I would see over and over and over, just kind of coincidentally, oh, well, you know what, and they missed 55 days of school last year. But nobody had paid any attention to it. And so I just got to the point where I couldn't any longer ignore that. So that's kind of the genesis. But now it's much more common because there is more of a recognition that it's not only a legal issue, but it's clearly, obviously, an educational issue.
So, Dr. Fedderman, I read a statistic about the number that in majority schools, a lot of the teachers are either less experienced, they make less, they haven't gotten full certification. What's going on with that? Why are those schools getting teachers that don't seem to be as high in the as highly trained as other teachers?
Sure. So our schools are a true reflection of the communities in which they reside. And just as communities get bad names, so do schools. And when when they receive bad names, it makes staffing that much more difficult. So, to make it clear, it's like, well, the word on the street is you don't want to go to, or teachers at X, Y, and Z don't last long. So therefore, the recruitment and retention of highly qualified teachers, it truly becomes a revolving door. And for many of those educators who take the opportunity to go to those schools, it's really a stepping stone until they can get something better. But I'm sorry, education should never be viewed as a stepping stone. What really should happen is to take an in-depth look and really triage the situation. And every school should be viewed as its own entity, and they should be given whatever resources they need to be successful. And if those resources are in place, there will be less students that will go before Judge Olds, because they will be in the classroom learning and doing the things that will give them a brighter future. And I find that the challenge or the obstacle is that many of the behaviors that are experienced in the learning environment, there is no course in any college readiness program that can prepare you to deal with hunger, that can prepare you to deal with, a student seeing their mother being involved in domestic violence, or seeing their father do drugs, or not having food on the table. So those things are contributing factors as to why these schools are identified as troubled, or the school or the community has been identified as an area or a place that's not so, pleasing to work or to attend.
Yeah. And are you, from the union's perspective, then, the Virginia Education Association, are there steps or things that you all are doing to retain and encourage people to stay in education?
Absolutely. One of the most significant things I can, bring to light right now, we led the efforts on House Bill 2037, which was the bill that allowed educators to receive their license in a fashion that did not penalize them for not being able to pass all of those standardized tests, such as the Praxis 1, 2, whatever the case may be. So we were identifying that there were teachers who were extremely significant with those most vulnerable populations who were doing extremely well. But because they were not meeting the mark of the standardized test, they were having to leave their job. And many of those individuals, were they didn't have a desire to leave. It was other reasons that made them leave. So we're trying to work with getting our educators highly qualified. We're working with colleges and universities to ensure that the teacher prep programs are robust, and it's really giving those student teachers an in-depth look at the possible scenarios they could experience once that classroom door shuts and they're ultimately the person in charge.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. We're talking about the gap between educational attainment and achievement and equity in schools between Black students or students of color and white kids. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Jimmeka, you work with young people on a daily basis. I'm wondering, do you think that education has as much of a priority in the household today as it did, say, when we were, well, I'll say for myself, when I was coming up back in the 60s and 70s? I mean, there was a big push, and there was this whole idea of, you've got to get an education. This is what's going to take you to the next level. This is what you're going to need to succeed. Is that same attitude in the homes today of the kids that you work with?
I think that across the board, all families, parents, actually still see the value in education. They see it as an opportunity to experience social mobility, especially those that come from low-income communities. I think that there's more layers to it. I think that there's challenges that, once again, I'm going to always connect it back to those challenges of poverty that prevents opportunities for the parents to be as invested in their children's education and success. And so when we say that, there's going to be, it's going to look different. You can be motivated and have the idea that there's value in something, but to actually be able to take action and put your foot forward to invest in those things, it's based on ability. And I think that there's more, not a motivational factor with parents being as invested in school, but the ability, because some of those parents are working multiple jobs to, to pay, just to afford to pay ends meet and take care of their children. There's other barriers. I know even with Hispanic populations and some of the youth that I've served, some of those parents, they may not have finished high school or do not feel confident or competent to take on the task of really understanding some of the things that their children are learning in school. And so they're kind of removed because they don't feel like they're equipped to kind of intervene in their child's education. And so they kind of put their trust in, and more so in the teachers and the schools to invest in their children. And once again, it's still, I want my child to succeed. I want my child to graduate and have a great career in advance, but I lack the tools and the skills to even know how to navigate this system. I've actually had parents come to me and ask me, hey, can you talk to their guidance counselor? They don't even know the questions to ask. So I think it's more so the ability of them feeling confident in their ability to really navigate and support their children sometimes.
Oh, wow. Let's talk to Michael in Norfolk. Michael, hi, you're on the air.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I think we have to consider single-parent households versus two-parent households because you have half as many teachers in the home attending to the child. I think we also have to consider on the side of wealth or economics, not just poverty, but wealth and extreme wealth. For example, there are 17 million Roman Catholic children in school. 12 million of the 17 are in Catholic schools. 5 million are in public schools. That's according to Bill Cunningham. So if they can afford to send their children to expensive Catholic schools, the wealth of the Catholic community, plus the tax exemptions that are supplied to it, are a major factor there. So what about the Asian students who do so well? Well, they have strong families.
Okay, Michael, we get your point. Let me let the panel respond to that. Jimmeka, I'm going to come to you first because I hear that a lot, that one of the issues is that because of single parent homes, that's why students are not able to achieve in school. I wonder how you react to that.
I react to that in the sense that I totally understand. I myself am a single parent and my child is in school. I know for me, I've went through this educational system and I went to college and, right now I'm pursuing a Ph.D. So I'm very cognizant to the challenges and I know how to navigate this system. And so that way I'm able to support her even more. I think it's also beyond just being a single parent, it's also this competence of understanding how the system works in education and actually feeling confident to successfully have these conversations with teachers. Prime example, really quick. My daughter's in remote school, and she, I went through Power School. There you go, first thing. I know technology. I was able to go through Power School, look at her grades. I saw she had a 50 on one of her assignments. I talked to my child. I said, hey, you have a 50 on the assignment. She said, I turned it in. She pulled up her Canvas page, the youth Canvas, and showed me the assignment was 100. So then I used technology, communicated to the teacher, emailed him, told him that I see this assignment on Canvas. It's 100. This is proof that, go back and check and verify. The teacher then changed her grade and bumped her grade up to a B from a low C to a B. So how many parents actually are equipped to be able to go through that kind of process to ensure that their student is actually being, looked at. I mean, and at the same time, these teachers have over, she's in middle school, they have hundreds of kids they're seeing every day.
Sure.
And so, are these parents able to navigate this system to check behind these teachers and actually support their child? And so, granted, I'm a single parent, but I think it's also I have the tools and understand how to navigate the system.
And how to be able to do that. And Judge Olds, I want to ask you, again, back to this whole idea of single parent households being a problem in educational achievement. Is that what you see or saw in the courts?
Well, I'm happy to jump in because I, too, am a product of a single-parent household. So clearly it's more, as Jimmeka was saying, I think about parent engagement and having not only the understanding and I would say the desire for educational excellence, which, maybe it's just a sign of the generational changes, but I would agree it's not as prevalent as it was perhaps, Barbara, when we were in school. And, one of the first, I know you know about the book I wrote, but one of the first chapters, what I talk about is an example of where a child oftentimes would look up at me and kind of side-eye to their parent and say, how come you never told me that? Because I would spend a lot of time, one of my undergraduate degrees is in psychology, but I would say that often, that I felt like in many ways I was being, a social worker or a psychologist in just trying to impress upon students that it's not your circumstances. It's not the fact that your, father or mother or whoever's not in the home, but it's what's inside of you. And so I guess we're all agreeing that, single parenthood can be a factor, but I think we have to look overall at, not every single parent is using that as an excuse. And people like Jimmeka are saying, wait a minute. Yeah, I got a lot of balls to keep in the air, but my child's education is a priority. But yes, I would see, I'll tell you what I would see. Obviously, children who come before the court rarely come with two parents, and most often it is the mother. So that kind of, answers that question across the board.
If you're just joining us, we're talking about the education gap between children of color and their white counterparts with Dr. James Fedderman, president of the Virginia Education Association, Jimmeka Anderson, Ph.D. candidate who specializes in urban education, and former Juvenile and Domestic Relations judge for the city of Chesapeake, Judge Eileen Olds, who also serves as a board member of WHRO Public Media. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. If you are an African-American parent, call in, tell us about your involvement and how you keep your child engaged in education. 440-2665, 1-800-940-2240. John joins us from Chesapeake. Hi, John, you're on the air. John, are you there? John, are you there? Well, I guess John's not there, so we will move on.
Hello.
Oh, there
thank
you are.
So much.
Sure.
For me. So I think one of the really interesting questions here, and there's some really great topics being discussed, is the impact of generational trauma on our cognitive ability to participate in a learning system that is a little imbalanced, or maybe a lot imbalanced when we talk about dominant and subdominant culture. And I think that in a lot of circumstances, the dominant culture is sort of setting the bar, setting the standard, and there's not an equivalent, there's the cognitive capacities in terms of their the role of generational trauma in impacting that cognitive ability is not balanced. And a good example of this, which I think is something that we could start to look into, is the impact of exposure to trauma or to generational trauma and how that impacts our ability to remember information or to process information that has some element of retention. So if our assessments are focused on looking at what retention has been achieved by a student, and our students have varying levels of retention ability based on the fact that they were exposed to trauma, whether it was in this generation or 5 generations ago, that could really impact some of the outcomes that we see across the education. I think that a lot of the topics that we tend to focus on, such as like single parent, that is one that we could probably exclude generational trauma and see some of the same tendencies across different groups within our society. But if we focus in on exposure to generational trauma, I think that we'll start to see some differences that may cue us into that impact.
Okay, John, thanks for the call. Let me let our educators respond to that. Dr. Fedderman, what do you think?
Sure. One thing that I have to definitely share, and I really appreciate this conversation. So I am a product of a dual parent home where my father never went to school a day in his life, and my mother finished the 5th grade. And my dad is probably one of the best role models I've ever had in my life. He would ask me every night to look at my homework, and he would tell me, "Son, this is not right. Stop cutting lines. You'll get there. Stop cutting corners. You'll get there quicker in a straight line. Do it right the first time." While he may never knew the content, he knew his child. And I attribute a lot of my academic excellence to his drive for me to be the best version of myself. And while single parenting is a factor, you can still have 2 parents and still not have a substantive home. And my parents were 2 of the most amazing people I've ever met. But I didn't have a point of reference. I didn't know what I was missing because my environment was all I knew.
Yeah.
But they had it within them to provide the best for me. And while they may not have been able to give it, they put me in situations and surroundings where I could get it from other people. So I think, we have to seek first to understand in order to be understood. We've got to meet people where they are. And schools have really been in a place of judgment of parents because of what they have or what they don't have, while not realizing their number one job is to educate the child, to break those barriers and to see it from a different perspective. And many educators really get caught up in their own belief and how they were raised and wanting that for everyone else. And that's just not fair.
Jimmeka, what do you think about John's premise on trauma, generational trauma, and how that may or may not impact the ability to retain information?
Oh my gosh, I literally was just processing everything that he was saying, and I was just really reflecting on the fact that a lot of the children that I know I serve that come from high poverty communities. I've mainly worked with schools that are considered high poverty. Like I said, 90% or more on free and reduced lunch, and some of the trauma that they're experiencing in the home on a daily basis. I also have done a lot of work with alternative schools. A lot of those kids are experiencing trauma in the home on a daily basis. And what it makes me think of when John was talking is having a continuous hyperstimulated amygdala. Your brain, do you know what that's like when your brain is always in fight and flight mode? Biologically, you cannot reason. You cannot retain. You cannot focus. I know right now if I had a hyperstimulated amygdala with trauma happening around me right now, I probably would be all flustered on this call. And so I think that there's this expectation for children that are in these environments that have issues with trauma and they're dealing with it. Their parents' trauma is now also coming down on them as well. And they're in a constant state of having a hyperactive amygdala, and they're always in this fight or flight mode. It's really hard for them to be successful. So there's more things that we need to consider to support students that are in these situations in these schools that are experiencing trauma as a result of being in high poverty communities, and all the other things that they're being influenced by.
Yeah. Dr. Fedderman, let me ask you also about another issue within the classroom, and that is the lack of Black male teachers. Is that a concern of the VEA, and what are you guys doing, if anything, to try to first of all, do you think it's important that particularly Black male students see a Black male teacher at some point in their educational journey, as far as being a positive influence? And if so, are there any efforts being done to increase the number of Black men who go into the classroom?
Absolutely. As a educator, Black male of color myself, it's very important. And through my entire experience, I can't tell you how much it would have, meant to me to have a Black male as a teacher. But one of the things that we're finding is that many of the Black males who enter the field of education, many of them are not given the opportunity to increase or advance in their career because they are great at what they do. And many of them are found to be great disciplinarians, and many of them are not promoted because of fear of losing that level of control or discipline within the work site. So we have been working with our Department of Ed to try to have different seminars and programs. We've had a Black male Teachers of Color Summit that we've utilized to promote just the awareness of the need for more men of color in the classroom, and to actually use them for their skill set and their expertise, to view them greater than just being a coach, view them greater than just being a corraler of inappropriate discipline, but truly use them for the expertise to break the barriers that many of our students are experiencing. So we are working with the Virginia Department of Ed to improve our programs to get more Black males in the school. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So Judge Olds, is that the prison to pipeline, the pipeline to prisons, what am I trying to say? I am so sorry.
Cradle to prison.
Cradle to prison. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. The cradle to prison pipeline. Is that real? I mean, you see it. You've seen it on a daily basis, but is it real?
In many respects,
Okay.
it's part of what we're already talking about in terms of trauma, in terms of socioeconomic conditions, in terms of, exposure to, I guess, again, more traumatic things, because we know that traumatic experiences impact not only learning behavior, but I would say learning relationships. And I heard, I think it was Dr. Fedderman referred to, just the relationships with not only Black male teachers, for instance, but just teachers in general, that a lot of times because of where people come from and what their home experiences are, they're not in the best position to connect or interact with teachers and other students in a way that's viewed in a typical fashion. And by that, I mean, people are labeled. I've said this, I don't know how many times, it's nothing like getting labeled smart early on. That's something I guess I wrote in on. But, the label itself is so disabling that children, who have from the cradle experienced things that are not optimal, just get pigeonholed into that pipeline that then becomes, as you said, not only I would say cradle to poor school performance, to court involvement, to prison.
And once you get labeled, it is very difficult to come out of that.
That's right.
In other words, people may not see the ability that you have to do other things because they've tracked you or said this is where you belong.
That's right.
Yeah. Dr. Fedderman, what would you say to a parent today who may or may not have a child in school? What is different about today's classroom say, compared to 10 years ago? What's the big difference?
Politics are truly destroying the art and the passion for teachers or educators being able to strategically and methodically do the job that they went to school to do. Parents who have no investment at all are wreaking havoc at many of our local school boards about issues that really are not, existent within our curriculum. One classic example is critical race theory. It is not being taught, and for many of our parents or for many of our community members who have extreme care about our public schools, they don't really know. So they're just jumping on the bandwagon and just saying what other people are saying, not seeking the truth about really what's going on. And when they come to the school to ask questions, they enter on the defense.
So, Jimmeka, what from your perspective, what's different about today's classroom compared to when you were in school? Let's say that, because I know you're the youngest of all of us.
Yes, I am. And so I was in school during the busing era here in Charlotte, and I definitely would say the difference now. I actually just did a history project with students on the education of Blacks in Charlotte, and we created this online exhibition for people to actually see the shifts and changes that have happened. And one of the main things that we discovered is, of course, resegregation has happened in schools. Schools are now racially divided more than they were before during when they first got segregated. But most importantly, it's economically divided. And I think that what we have also seen with research is that it's really the fact that schools are economically divided that impacts them more so than the being racially divided. At a time many decades and years ago when schools were still segregated and there were predominantly Black schools, Black students were in schools with kids from different economic classes, and that served as a social buffer for them. So you can go to school with a child that their parent is a lawyer or an educator, no matter, if you come from a low-income environment, but that exposure, that access, and that creates social capital among peers for you to be exposed and to learn and see different habits. And so it's more so that economic buffer, social buffer that has an impact as well. And I think that that's one of the hugest components right now is that we're seeing high concentrated poverty schools, and they're economically divided today.
So the fact that because many African Americans are poor, that it's almost like the racism is or the racial issue is layered on top of the poverty issue, which makes it a problem.
The racial issue is layered on the poverty issue because schools are neighborhood schools. And very similar to the way things are in my state and city, communities are racially and economically divided and isolated. So if you're going to your neighborhood school, you're going to be more than likely going to a school, if it's a high concentrated poverty school, with people that look like you. And so you have a high concentrated poverty school full of historically marginalized students that are Black and Hispanic. In these urban communities.
So we got a call from or someone that doesn't want to go on air, but he wanted to know, his name is Tony, he wanted to know whether magnet schools are draining funds that could be used to help everyone. What do you think, Dr. Fedderman?
Well, I think it's important to if we use the correct terminology, like right now we're understanding charter schools.
Okay.
So if it's a public charter, then the answer is no, because the public charters are governed through the local school divisions. But private charters totally drain money from the public schools. And it does that because it asks that school operate as if the money were still going to the regular public school. So the public school is asked to operate as if it has 100 students with the allocation for 100 students, but the money for 20 of those students will be sent to that charter school, but the public school is still told to operate as if you have full funding, and it's not equitable. And that will totally exacerbate this disparity that we're talking about.
So let's talk about some solutions, because what do we need to be doing in order to turn this around? I don't know how, as you said, Jimmeka, schools are neighborhood schools. So if a school is a Title I school, it probably may remain that way. But does that necessarily mean that the education has to be less or not as good as education in other schools? Let me start with you, Dr. Fedderman, and we'll go around the room.
No, I think the answer to this is truly following a community schools model, because when you're truly invested in the community in which you live, you're less likely to see hurt, harm, or danger come to it. And when you embrace the community schools model, you're giving those students the wraparound services that will mitigate them not being in school during the summer. It will keep the community school open so that the students have a resource. The things that we're doing now in the midst of COVID, like ensuring that students are able to take food home, ensuring that, students have, the Chromebooks and all of those different technology devices to continue their education. These are models that should be in place anyways. It should be in place anyways. So therefore, there is a continuum of learning that's not disrupted because of the students' lack of resources or their parents or their families' inability to provide. So I believe the solution to this is truly embracing a community schools model where that school can provide everything, like COVID clinics, like testing clinics, like vaccination clinics, like food pantry, a clothes closet, all of those things.
So, Dr. Fedderman, let me push back a little bit, because I hear people say, well, then you're expecting the school to do everything, and that's not fair. Our job is simply to educate.
Well, that's the notion of the misunderstanding. When you have the community schools model, you're actually bringing in resources from your community, such as your community services board, such as your social services, such as the Boys and Girls Club, the Boy Scout, Girl Scout, all of those people, all of those organizations truly come in to make this learning experience more enriched for the students. And the takeaway is that the students want to be in school versus being in the community where they will not have to be a participant in Judge Olds' courts, because truancy is not an issue.
Okay. Judge Olds, a solution. What do you think? What do we need to do?
Wow. I think it goes back in part to your question about what has changed, meaning I would like to see more parents, more educators, the community embrace education as a priority. And, as somebody, I'm telling my age, but who was born, 3 years after Brown versus Ward was decided. But it's the facts are the same.
Yeah.
When things are unequal, separate, I'll say, when things are separate, and I think in many ways we still have a separate educational system, that they're inherently unequal. To give another, I guess, legal or answer to the solution is, again, not only making education a priority, but also recognizing that it's the duty of the courts, it's the duty of the community and of the schools not to let children fall through the cracks and get so far out. And again, I'm referencing back to truancy, that they become a statistic. And so, as I said earlier, the law, Virginia law anyway, requires that a child go to school every day, all day, follow the school's code of conduct. And when they don't, if you jump on that early on, then we don't have to worry about me seeing a social history that says they've missed 55 days. So that's a simple solution, but it's so much larger than that. But I think it boils down to just recognizing and embracing in a much larger way the fact that education, as we know, is the great equalizer, and we need it's as someone said earlier, it's either pay now or pay later.
Pay later, absolutely. So the whole village concept really is coming back around again,
right.
In terms of what we need to do for our kids. Jimmeka, what's the solution?
I think that when we talk about reform, when it comes to education, that of course it takes. You have the micro and the macro level efforts with reform. I think that there's so many things that can be done on the micro level, but when I a lot of the research I've been doing, looking at ability and motivation and with students in school, I have to look at it in the approach of there's this framework called the 6 sources of influence model, which is an individual, social, and structural level. And I think a lot of the recommendations we're providing right now are on a social level, and it comes into play with this concept of we want to bring in equity. But there's the concept of equity, and there's the concept of social justice, which is equity is to continue to reinforce and to provide extra resources to help support, versus social justice is dismantling the system that has created these inequities. And I wholeheartedly, as an urban education scholar, truly am for dismantling these systems that have created the systems of inequity, because I feel like we're expecting, in the metaphor of Tupac Shakur, to keep having roses grow in concrete. We just keep trying to plow soil and water the concrete and expect a garden of roses to form. And I really think that we need to dismantle the structures in place. But by doing so, that's going to take policy reform and so many things on the educational level. But until then, some of those things that can be solutions can definitely be addressing some of the challenges with a lot of the novice teachers that are coming into the schools to work with students and Black students and students from low-income communities. Also, right now, a lot of these teachers are teaching for tests, and they're teaching for tests because funding for a lot of these Title I schools are given to schools to provide these tests so that they can collect data on the students. And so that's why they're teaching to the tests. But we all know that these tests are Eurocentric in curriculum. We also know that they're culturally biased. And so I think that there's this level of cultural competence and cultural responsive teaching practices that have to be taught to to teachers that are serving students in urban communities, among the other things that the panel here have recommended.
Okay. Wow. You guys have given us a lot to think about, and I so really appreciate it. The hour is up. I can't believe it. But Dr. James Fedderman, president of the Virginia Education Association, Jimmeka Anderson, Ph.D. candidate who specializes in urban education, and former Juvenile and Domestic Relations judge for the city of Chesapeake, Judge Eileen Olds, who also serves as a board member here at WHRO Public Media. Thank you all so much for this conversation and for giving us some tools to think about as we talk about the education of our youth. Thank you so much for joining me. And audience, we had a lot to unpack and think about in today's show. So if you'd like to hear it again or share it with a friend, go to our website, anotherviewradio.org, and download the podcast. And don't forget to sign up for our eView newsletter. It's a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows. Now, we will continue our conversation on education and Black children on February the 3rd here in Another View. February the 10th, which is our virtual town hall. And we will give you more details on how you can sign up for that in the upcoming weeks. Next week on Another View, the Another View Roundtable, we haven't heard from our AV pundits in a while, and trust me, they are excited to be back on the air, and you know the conversation will be lively. Our theme music is an original composition created especially for Another View by Jay Sennett. Thanks to Paul Bibbo for filling in for Lisa Godley as today's show producer. Todd Washburn is our audio engineer, and guess what? Paul did double duty and answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. This Omicron variant is no joke. Get vaccinated, mask up, get tested if you have symptoms or have been exposed, and please stay safe. I'm looking forward to getting together again next Thursday at noon for Another View.
Support comes from Thomas Nelson Community College, now becoming Virginia Peninsula Community College, the first choice to start a bachelor's degree since tuition is 1/3 the cost of four-year schools. More at tncc.edu.
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, carrying out your charitable wishes forever, whether it's helping shelter animals, feeding the homeless, enhancing the arts, or supporting students. Learn more at leaveabequest.org.